All right, it is 7 o'clock. We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to tonight's presentation. All right, well, let's just get this going. Oh, there we go. My name is John Mantilla. I'm one of the co-founders here at Parco. I'm also joined tonight by my colleague Daniel Hampel, one of my co-founders as well. He's on the line tonight. He'll be answering any questions that you have in the question and answer section. I do see a lot of new faces on tonight's presentation, a lot of new names. So everybody who's new, welcome. And I do see some familiar faces, of course, as well. And those of you who have been to our presentations before, welcome back. So a little bit of background for those of you who are new. We are Parco, that stands for Pensioned Americans Retirement Company. And we do holistic retirement and financial planning for anybody with a pension. Our process is factors in everything that could matter to a federal employer that relates to their federal service, things like their benefits, their years of service, things like that, and weighs all that with their financial needs, insurance needs, tax and accounting needs to create a holistic plan for how to put yourself in the best position to achieve your goals. And we work with people no matter what stage of their career they're in. Some people, they're just starting out, beginning their careers. Many times we talk to people who are in the middle of their careers and want to make sure that they've done everything right or put themselves in a good position for the future. And then oftentimes we're dealing with people who are near the end of their careers, or who have actually already retired and want to now enjoy the retirement that they've earned over a career that may have spanned 2, 3, maybe even 4 decades. So wherever you are in this process, we work with everyone. And the word's getting out about us. You may have seen us written up in publications like USA Today and the Wall Street Journal and Forbes, and we're expanding this all the time as we talk to more and more people and grow our network that way. So a couple ground rules before we get started for the benefit of those of you who are new. Our goal is to keep these presentations to about 20 to 30 minutes. So that's about how long tonight's presentation will last. If you do have questions, you can ask them within the Zoom window itself. There's a little Q&A button on there. So if you have a question, we'll answer them individually within the Q&A section there. And then after tonight's presentation, everyone who is on tonight will receive an email with a survey asking for your feedback. If there's things you think we did well, let us know. If there's things you think we could improve, let us know as well. We did this presentation last week. We made some improvements based on the feedback that we received from the attendees. So we really take that feedback to heart. If there's a topic that you'd like us to cover that you haven't heard us cover before, that you'd like us to pick up again, tell us that too. We're always looking for feedback, and we want to make these webinars, these presentations, as valuable as possible to you, our clients. So let's go ahead and dig in. So tonight's presentation is called Why Are Feds Different? It's something we mention when we speak with every federal employee, federal retiree client we talk about, but it bears repeating that federal employees, when it comes to financial planning and retirement planning and just thinking about how life will change as you get older and go through retirement, that whole planning process is really different than what most Americans have to experience because you work for the federal government. So tonight we'll start by talking about some key considerations and some framing to think about, just setting the stage. Then we'll talk about the differences that you have while working. Then we'll talk about the unique choice that all federal employees or pensioned Americans have to make when they become retirement eligible. And then we'll talk about some of the key differences that you need to consider in retirement. So let's start by some framing and consideration. So you worked for the federal government. They're the largest employer in the United States. They employ the most amount of people. It's the single largest employing organization in the United States. And when you work for the federal government, there are certain roles that you have in that job, in the course of that employment, that really can't exist in the private sector. Everybody who's an astronaut is a federal employee. The people who work for the FBI and investigate crimes, or regulators, these are things that only government can do. So the nature of your work oftentimes is very different than what it's like in the private sector. And when you work for the federal government, because it has 3 million employees and 6 million retirees and beneficiaries that the federal government has to take care of, it's a highly structured process with lots of strict rules that have to apply equally and equitably to everyone. It's, as I'm sure you know, many of you may be overwhelmed with the amount of rules and regulations and nuances that you have to consider as an employee of the federal government. And unique among Americans, as federal employees, you have to navigate and shoulder government shutdowns and furloughs more than your fellow citizens. When the government shuts down or your office gets furloughed, you might not be working for the period of time that happens. The politics really falls on you. Also, when there's a debt crisis or a debt ceiling crisis, the government can borrow from the G fund, can borrow from the government securities fund. So, they can't do that for any other private sector company, other private sector 401k. So again, feds just have unique nuances that come with the course of their employment. And when you think about retirement too, it's different. The average American retires at about age 64. They on average spend about 4 years with their employer, and about 1/3 of Americans, when you factor in state, local, federal, and private sector, have a pension right now. And that number continues to go down. Well, feds are different because you guys can retire far younger. So you can retire a full, oftentimes many years before age 64, but on average, feds retire a lot younger. The average length of service with the federal government is 8 years, but I would imagine that everybody that we tend to talk to or who's on the line tonight has likely been working for the government a heck of a lot longer than that, maybe 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. So the duration of your employment with the federal government, with your employer, is just a lot longer than what it is for most people in the private sector. And that has all kinds of different effects. And then if you retire from the federal government, you're going to have a pension. And that pension really is one of the important differences, but it's so valuable. And we'll talk about how valuable that is in a few minutes. So let's talk about some of the key differences and key considerations as federal employees to consider first while working. One of the biggest benefits that you have is your federal healthcare, your FEHB. So when you think about the coverage that you have from FEHB, first of all, you have a lot of choices. You can choose a Blue Cross plan, Aetna plan, Kaiser, GEHA, like there's all kinds of different healthcare plans that you can choose from. And one of the key benefits that you have as a federal employee and then as a retiree is that a large portion of your premiums are subsidized by your employer. So regardless of the plan that you have as well, the government's subsidizing that premium. And what's also cool is that no matter what age you are, if you're 31 like me, or if you're 61, the premiums that you pay for the same plan are the same. They're not age dependent. In the private sector, that's not always the case. In addition to the premiums are just a whole lot higher. If you think about the plan that you have, let's say with your Blue Cross plan, if you were trying to purchase that in the private market, it would cost 2 or 3 times as much in the private market as it costs you. Right? And that means real savings throughout the course of your retirement. We estimate that your healthcare benefit alone, and we'll talk about it a little more again, but just to reiterate, your healthcare benefit alone, the fact that you get to keep your federal healthcare in retirement and keep that subsidy, is worth over $200,000 throughout the course of a retirement. That by our estimates, it's an incredibly powerful benefit, and you only pay a fraction of the costs. In addition, federal employees have a lot more leave than the average American. The average American gets the 7 federal holidays, and then they get usually 10 days of PTO or 2 work weeks off, 5 days in a work week. Federal employees get 30 days of annual leave. You get the 7 federal holidays, and then you also get 13 sick leave days per year. And you can, in many ways, roll these over. You can accumulate them. So you get a lot more time off, and that benefit than most Americans. The fact that you have dedicated sick leave and that there's no limit on how much you accumulate is an incredibly valuable benefit. I mean, think about it. suppose, and I have many clients who I can point to who have had this happen. They're in the last year of their career and they need to get their knee replaced, or they need to get a hip replacement, or they need to get a major surgery done. They've accumulated a lot of a lot of sick leave, excuse me. So they use 6 months of sick leave in the last year of their working career. Well, that's 6 months of sick leave that they get paid their regular wage. So if you make, say, $60,000 a year at the post office, and you get to spend half of that year burning your sick leave, that sick leave benefits were $30,000 to you that year. So it's just an incredibly valuable benefit that we spend a lot of times helping our clients strategize, but this doesn't exist in most private sector situations. So when we think about while you're working as well, there's another important benefit to consider, and that's, what do you have available to you if you pass away? Well, what would pass on to your heirs if you pass away as an employee of the federal government? In the private sector, if you pass away as an employee, that's a sad thing. But with the federal government, you actually get a specific benefit called the Basic Employee Death Benefit, which is free while you're working. Now, this is not FEGLI. This is the Basic Employee Death Benefit. It's paid to your beneficiaries by the government in addition to any FEGLI, any life insurance that you have. It's calculated as half your salary plus $37,020.55. So if you make, let's say, $60,000 a year at the post office, using that same example, your family would be entitled to $30,000 plus $37,020.55. So $67,000 would be their basic employee death benefit that would be entitled to them if you pass away while you're working. This goes away in retirement, but it's another very valuable benefit that you have available to you as a federal employee. And then you also have FEGLI, in particular, Basic Life. Basic Life is calculated as your salary rounded up to the nearest thousand plus $2,000 in coverage. Depending on where you work, it's a great deal no matter what. Postal employees get it for free. They never have to pay premiums for it while they're working. The post office actually pays for that while they're working. Every other agency, you have to pay for it, but it only costs you 16 cents per pay period per $1,000 in coverage. And that price is the same no matter how old you are, like that amount per thousand. So Basic Life is a really great deal while you're working. And in addition, and we'll talk about it in a minute, it has some really powerful benefits for you once you're retired too. In addition to the life insurance benefits that you have, and the sick leave benefits and the leave benefits that you have while working as a federal employee, you also have a relatively generous TSP match. The average 401k match in the United States is 4.7%. The TSP effectively has a 5% match. Now, it doesn't work exactly like that. You actually get an automatic 1% agency contribution for free, even if you never contributed to the TSP. Then you get a 3% dollar for dollar match. And then for the next $2 or the next 2% that you put in, they match 0.5%. So if you put in 5%, you get a full 5% match effectively. So that's why we always recommend our clients at least contribute 5% to put as much money away to basically to take a full advantage of that matching program. Really, really generous 401k program. Further, while you're working, you have access to public student loan forgiveness. I just got off the phone with a client before this meeting tonight, speaking about that. It was introduced in 2007 and arose from the College Cost Reduction and Access Act. And as a public servant, as a civil servant, you have access to a federal program that's designed to make it so that way after 10 years, your student loans can be forgiven. So for many Americans, student loans are something that they've had to pay for, and some people pay them all the way up to the time that they're retired. Whereas for federal employees, you can actually have those wiped away after 10 years of service. And right now, there's actually a special provision through October of this year for federal employees, which is basically like an extended waiver of that student loan forgiveness program. So if you think that falls into your situation, or if you'd like to learn more about that, let us know, and we'll be happy to walk you through how that works. But the fact that you can have your student loans forgiven, again, makes it so it's much, much more easy for you to accumulate wealth, because you can have that debt wiped away and you can plow those payments that you had been putting toward your student loans into a savings account or saving for retirement. So those are some of the the key benefits that you have available to you while you're working that make you different as a federal employee versus a public sector employee or a private sector employee, excuse me. Now, I often mention this with our clients. When federal employees come to retirement age, once you become fully eligible to retire, you're faced with a choice that most people never have to think about. And it's the choice that once you're fully eligible to retire, you can either keep going to work and get your salary, or you can retire, get your pension, and get all your retirement benefits. But you can't do both. So the day that you become fully eligible to retire for an unreduced pension, the math basically changes. So, and it says that you're going to work for the difference between what you would make while you're working and what you would make, or what you're making while you're working and what you would make in retirement. So I know we've covered this before on some past webinars, but it's why we always really focus on that net to net idea and a net to net calculation. What would you be taking home net while you're working? What do you take home net in retirement? And once you're fully eligible to retire, you're going to work for that difference. And the reason why this works this way is because federal employees have a much sturdier retirement stool than most Americans. And some of you may have heard this before. A federal retirement is based on a three-legged stool of your FERS supplement and Social Security, your pension, and your retirement savings. Well, the average American is going to be living on mostly their Social Security. That's just the fact. For most Americans, that's the primary, if not only, source of income they have coming in retirement. And then they also might have had some retirement savings as well. But the fact that you have that pension really changes the game when it comes to planning for retirement. Because I can't tell you the amount of times that we've spoken with clients that say, hey, I feel like I haven't saved enough, or I talked to my neighbor and he's saved a bunch more money than I have. And that might be true. But that might be true because your neighbors had to have saved money because they don't have a pension. And that pension that you have might be a whole lot, or I can say with certainty, that pension's worth a whole lot more than you realize. And it doesn't show up on your balance sheet. If you look at your TD Ameritrade account or your Fidelity account, it doesn't show up as a balance in your savings asset, but it's definitely an asset for you. We like to show how. Because first, the federal pension is an annuity that's going to be paid to you throughout the course of your life. In addition, after age 62, you get a cost of living adjustment. A COLA is an inflation protection against it's a way to preserve the purchasing power of your annuity, of your pension. That's unheard of in any other setting. The fact that it has that inflation protection is incredibly, incredibly valuable. And so we wanted to take an example of Federal Fran. Okay, she's been working for the post office for 30 years. Or she's working for the government, for 30 years. She has a high three of $72,730. She's age 62. Now, she's a woman, so her life expectancy at age 62, using the Social Security mortality table, says 85. And her annual pension is going to be $24,000 per year, or $2,000 per month. And so when we look at this, if you looked at Fran's bank account, there's nothing that says, hey, Fran has this $24,000 a year benefit, but that's definitely worth something. And so we often get this question, well, John Parko, how much is this pension really worth? And so the best way to do that is to say, okay, well, if we were trying to buy $24,000 per year in income, if we were going to go out and buy an annuity, let's say, that produced $24,000 in income for a 62-year-old woman, how much would that cost? And so what that means is that a $24,000 a year income stream with no cost of living adjustment would cost today $472,000. That's what that pension is worth today. Without a COLA, with a COLA, if we added that COLA in, so add in the cost of living adjustment, the price of that, or the cost of that, would go up to almost $800,000. So this yellow section here is what that pension is really worth. Now, over that time period, there's payments collected and things like that. But what's the present value of that pension? If you were trying to purchase that, if you were trying to say, hey, I want to capitalize that and I want to see what that looks like on my balance sheet, with that COLA for Fran, it's worth almost $800,000. Now, that's a heck of a valuable thing. And when you add that, in addition to the healthcare subsidy that you have, in Fran's case, just those two together, worth over $1 million. So when we think about retirement planning for federal employees, this is what we're talking about, that, you oftentimes are a lot more wealthy than you realize, but these things don't show up there. And for federal employees too, moving on from the pension, talking about healthcare, some of you may have friends, relatives in the private sector. They're concerned and worried about healthcare costs, and they should be. I mean, healthcare costs continue to rise. For federal employees, though, the whole strategy is different because you get to keep your federal healthcare. And so when you get to Medicare age, most people just say, hey, I'm going to elect Medicare and I'm going to use my FEHB as a supplemental. And those two together are going to pretty much eliminate my out-of-pocket expenses when it comes to my health insurance or my healthcare needs in retirement. For the average American that doesn't have that FEHB, Medicare becomes their primary insurance at age 65, just like it does for feds, but then they have to find a Medicare supplemental plan. Medicare supplemental plans, I'm sure some of you now are getting lots of phone calls about those. That is a challenging thing to have to navigate. And oftentimes you're paying for insurance that doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot. So for the average American, Medicare is kind of a scary topic to think about. Whereas for the average Fed, for the normal Fed, it's just, hey, I just turn this on, have my FEHB. Now I know my out-of-pocket expenses are pretty much eliminated. In addition, something else that the private sector individuals have to be concerned about is burial expenses. A lot of people say, oh, well, I'm really concerned about being able to pay for my funeral, or hey, I need to buy some final expense insurance. Federal employees really don't have to worry about that, because if most federal employees, when they fill out their retirement paperwork, elect on the FEGLI section the 75% reduction in basic life. And what that means is that at age 65 or retirement, whichever one comes later, that basic life becomes free, but the coverage level reduces by 2% per month until it reaches 25% of its value. So if you had, say, $60,000 in basic life, it would reduce down until it reached $15,000, right? 25% of the initial value, reduced by 75%. But that $15,000 you would have for life. And there's your burial policy. I mean, based on what we know what the cost of funerals are, I mean, that's enough to usually throw a pretty good party in addition to having a funeral. So again, sometimes we talk to clients and say, hey, I'm talking to somebody that's trying to sell me this final expense or burial policy. And I say, well, do you feel like you need that in addition to the basic life that you'll have? And they'll say, oh, the person didn't mention that. Well, of course they didn't mention it. They're all just like with Medicare supplemental policies. Somebody will always try to recommend or sell that to you, especially if they don't know the federal benefits inside and out and understand how these things really work together. The question is always just, do you need it, or is it appropriate for your situation? Now, another one that we really focus on, and I'm sure you read a lot about it in the news, is Social Security. For the average American, like I said, that's going to be the sole, if not the primary source of income they have coming in retirement. Whereas for Fed, it's just a part of the story. The fact as well is that, before you even reach Social Security age, federal employees can retire fully eligible, and you can get the FERS supplement. That's that special annuity supplement that's meant to bridge the gap between when you retire before age 62 as a fully eligible federal employee and when you turn age 62. So even before you start getting Social Security, you can get this FERS supplement, which again helps bridge that gap. It's calculated as your expected Social Security at 62 multiplied by your FERS years of service divided by 40. But it's a really, again, extra benefit that you have in retirement that bridges that gap until you reach age where you can start getting Social Security. Now, one thing I'll point out, and we've done a whole webinar on Social Security. It's covered in it's uploaded onto our website. But I'll point out that federal employees generally retire a lot younger than the average American. That's the first point. Second point is Social Security for federal employees and retirees is is not nearly as important a part of the retirement story as it is for most Americans. What I mean by that is because you have a pension, because you have your thrift, because you might have other assets, you don't have to rely as much on Social Security as most Americans on average. And what that means is that you get to consider taking Social Security a lot younger than most Americans. For most Americans, it's really not thinkable of taking Social Security before they hit their full retirement age, because most people aren't retiring until they're 66, 67, 68, 69, older. And they're not retiring because they can't afford to, because they have to wait for their benefit, their Social Security benefit, to get bigger. For feds, you guys can retire younger, which means you can take this benefit earlier, which means you don't have to draw on your retirement savings nearly as much. You don't have to draw on your thrift, your IRAs, things like that nearly as much. You can use this Social Security benefit instead, and maybe give yourself more room to do Roth conversions with your TSP, with your IRAs. So that, again, the strategy for something like this is so much more dynamic for feds because of the benefits that you have as a federal retiree. And because you have these structured benefits that are all interconnected and work together, you should be working, and they should be working together to achieve those goals. So it's important to work with a group that really understands and can help you strategize all these things, because they focus on the federal space. And that's what we do every single day here at Parco. Here's a copy of tonight's Works Cited from tonight's presentation. Our webinar portal, like I plugged it a couple times throughout the presentation, is live. You can follow this QR code to access the portal. And we're always doing new presentations, building new webinars for feds. So next week, especially given all the market volatility we've been experiencing over the past few weeks, we'll be going over market volatility and how feds should think about it and why it matters. Down the line, we'll be talking about some taxes and tax concepts that feds need to be aware of. We'll talk about some TSP tips and tricks to navigate the TSP landscape. We'll cover mortgage refi and mortgages itself, when to consider it, some basic mortgage math or some interesting mortgage math that maybe some of you haven't seen before. And then the last Sunday of every month, as always, we do our retirement paperwork workshop. So you can follow this QR code to reach our website to see our portal and access that. If you need to reach us, you can reach us on goparco.com, info@goparco, 833-GOPARCO. We're always here. A human always answers the phone. And we're looking forward to staying around and answering any questions you have. As always, it's a pleasure to present to you, and we hope you enjoyed it.